Have you ever thought about the good old days that all people are talking about? Like the time when everything was better and now everything's worse. And this time range of good old days can be like from 50 years ago to several thousands years ago. But why do people say about good old times? There were a lot of problems back in the days. There were diseases, there were wars, there were many other things that are not comfortable, and yet people still say about good old times. The thing about the good old times that people always remember is the simplicity. Even people who weren't born in that time, they always think about how simple the time were, how uh, easier it was to live there. Sure, people could go, may have gone to factories and they had to do many other things, but it was simpler. It just felt simpler. Even when you look at the movies that were made at the time, they seem like they were like the time was much more simple than it is right now. And what is the reason for that? Why is there such an impression about this time? Well, the reason is even if you had to worry about something back in the past, you knew that it was the only thing you had to worry. Even if you were a caveman and you had to find some food, you knew that your only task you have is the food. And when you start searching for food, it's the only thing that you're doing. You may think about something, you may remember something, but your main focus is the food that you're trying to get. And so uh, when you used to live, probably you didn't live in the past, so neither did I. But if you lived back in the time, if you had lived back in the time, you would have only one task to worry about. Same with the time, maybe maybe like 100 years ago, when you only had to think about your job, about providing for your family. Sure, you still think about these things right now, but back in the day, that's the only thing you had to think about. There was nothing else bothering you. You never, even if you came home, there was only your family, there were some things you could do, but that's it. Nowadays, there are so many distractions and things that take your attention because you think, even if you think that there is not much things that you do, maybe you go to school or go to work and then you eat and you go to sleep and maybe you go to the gym and you feel that there's not really much going on in your life. But the problem is social media, because when you open social media, you suddenly see the whole world. And someone says about the war that is going in some place. Someone is talking about some drama that happened on the internet. Someone is talking about some guy who went to some sort of the journey across the earth. Some pictures are about someone who went to an amazing vacation. It overloads your brain because think about, you don't really need to think about all these things. For example, if you watch something about the wars in the world and what's happening, you're not a political expert and you're not someone who has the authority to solve this problem, and you know that you're not going to solve this problem, and yet you keep watching this news, like hoping that you would be the one to solve it. But that's the thing, you're not going to do anything with it, and yet you do so much stress to your brain that it thinks that it's your problem right now. Why why would you do that? So that's the problem with the today's world, why people talk about the simpler, better, good old times, because it wasn't actually much more simple than right now. There were still many things you need to consider, need to think about, but again, these were the only things you would have to think about. And nowadays, when you open the social media, your brain just explodes. Same thing with maybe video games. Although video games may, if you play video games at some designated time, it's may be fine. But if you just play whenever you want, then your brain constantly has to jump between one task and another. It's the thing is, your brain doesn't even know that this thing is not existing in your real life. When you play a video game, your brain thinks that it's the real life. When you're watching the news that are happening thousands of kilometers away, your brain thinks that it's happening right now, right here. And you overload your brain with these things. So if you want to live like in the good old times, you need to make some changes. First of all is to limit the use of social media. Everyone is talking about it, but you need to really understand why. Because your brain is not designed to handle that many tasks. If you handle it, you should treat it as your full-time job. But I don't think you want to have social media as your full-time job. In my example, when I started scrolling Reddit as I used to even a year ago, when I stopped watching YouTube that much all the time, I suddenly felt much more energy and much more peace. Sure, at the first when I started it, it felt kind of boring, but later I realized that that's the normal way to do the things. Because if you're bored, you have more willing, you're more willing to start really working because you want to do something. So, and besides, you have much lower stress levels after that. Because when you just always scroll in the social media, your brain just explodes from it, and you feel stressed all the time, even though there are not many stressful things in your usual life. So limit the use of social media. Stop watching YouTube whenever you want. Stop scrolling Reddit whenever you want. Stop scrolling Instagram or Twitter or other social network, I don't know, TikTok. Because it's especially TikTok, I think, because you have this 30-second videos and you scroll one after another, after another, after another. Your brain constantly has to switch between different tasks, between different things that it thinks it needs to do, because it believes that it's its problem right now. But it's not its problem. It's the thing that it's not supposed to solve. So when you scroll in TikTok, you always overloading your brain, because it always thinks that each new piece of information is a new task it needs to do. And at the end of scrolling TikTok, your brain feels like it did hundreds of tasks, even though you maybe haven't done any right now, if you're watching TikTok at the morning, for example. So first of all, limit the use of social media, and your brain will immediately feel better. And second thing, which I have done which I've done years ago, is to stop watching the news. It may sound crazy if you watch news all the time, because how else will I find out what is going on? But the thing is, why do you need to find out what's going on in the world? Why do you need to find out what's going on in Africa, in Asia, if you're living in Europe or America? If it's what happens on some front line, what happens in some other place, what natural disaster is happening somewhere in the world. It's not happening to you. It may sound a little bit selfish, but you sound much more like a hypocrite when you start talking about some problem in the world and you do nothing about it. So just stop watching the news about it. But you may say, but how will I find out if something bad is going to happen? What if something bad is going to happen and I won't know about it? But you will, because people are talking about it, because it's happening around you. You can not it's not like you're going to avoid something by stopping watching the news, or miss some event by watching the news. Because if it's that popular, people are going to talk about it. You will know from them. That's how people used to know things hundreds of years ago. Someone would talk about it and then you would know. So stop watching the news. It will stress you too much if you keep watching the news. So remove that completely. And the third thing you need to stop doing, that comes from the previous two things, is multitasking. because multitasking is basically the reason for all this stress. The first two things were the symptoms of that, but multitasking as a general is a very bad idea, because when your brain jumps from one task to another, then back, then forth, it doesn't feel that it jumps between the same tasks. It feels that every time it starts a new task. For example, if you try to study in school or you're trying to do a homework, then you suddenly decide to watch some YouTube. Then you want to continue and you continue your homework. Then you decide to watch some TikTok. Then you decide to see some news. Then you continue. And all the time your brain thinks that it's the new task, a new task, a new task. It always needs to adjust. I heard that the time for the brain to adjust from one task to another is from about 15 to 30 minutes. And yet you jump immediately and hope that your brain will catch on that quickly. But it won't. It's used to having long tasks that it can focus on, that it can get into the flow state. You may heard about the flow state, the thing when your brain is when you're doing everything smoothly and without any hindrances, and everything feels well when you're doing this. And you feel, uh, why don't I have this flow state when I do the tasks? Probably that's the reason why you don't have the flow state, because you spent 20 minutes for a task and then you jump to another task. You probably heard of some things like Pomodoro technique, like trying to study for 25 minutes and then have 5-minute rest, then 25 minutes and 5-minute rest. But first of all, again, 25 minutes is not enough for your brain to focus. Like, just about when your brain is about to focus, you switch the task. It's, it's just useless for your brain. And second, you probably don't even have a rest during these 5 minutes, because you're not resting. You're not like closing your eyes and just sitting, or you're trying to do some push-ups or doing something that unloads your brain. Instead, you switch to the different task. You watch social media again, or you trying to do something else that's more interesting. It's not really the rest. It's multitasking, and multitasking is bad. Just if you remember one thing from this video is that multitasking is bad. So limit the amount of tasks you're doing and stretch them properly. Of course, you may do some breaks. For example, you can do 10-minute break every hour or every hour and a half. And during this break, you can do some push-ups. You can just walk around. You can look at the window. You can drink some water, although it would be better if you have the water nearby so you could drink it all the time. Stay hydrated. But don't multitask. Just do the things in a long way, like in the good old times. Because that was the thing about the time years ago. You would work very long time, and when you had breaks, you would talk to your friends. You would go for a smoke. I don't approve smoking, but at least your brain is deloading. You would do something that wouldn't load your brain even more. You wouldn't take your phone and start scrolling it and just giving yourself 10 times the dose of new information that you had in the past hour. And after that rest, you're hoping that you're going to feel better, that you're going to feel more well rested. It's not going to happen. So stop multitasking at all. Let's summarize what we learned today. First of all, back in the days, you wouldn't have social media. So remove social media, or at least limit it, or at least watch some long form content, and not just scroll through the long form content, but uh, take some designated time when you're gonna watch, for example, a 15-minute video, and don't use it as a rest. Just have it for your brain just as another task to do. You need to treat it as a task because it's actually a task for your brain. So limit the social media. Second, don't watch the news. You won't find anything useful from that. And you will feel much simpler right now. Because look at all this, for example. Look, there's beautiful nature. Right now there's the rain is going on, and everything is quite beautiful. But imagine if at that time you would start thinking about the news, about what's going on in the world right now, about how some people suffer and how everything happens. You may think that you're showing the compassion, but you're not doing any help by that. I mean, if you donated something and you would really need to watch the news to know the exact situation in the world to make some specific change, I could understand that. But probably that's not the case. You're just living your life and you're not influencing the world somewhere thousands of kilometers away. So stop watching the news and you will see that the world is actually much more peaceful around you than you may think. And the third thing, stop multitasking, because multitasking overloads your brain. Multitasking makes your brain hurt. Multitasking makes your brain feel tired even though you haven't done anything. Just remember all the times that you started watching some TikTok or watching shorts on YouTube or scrolling through Reddit or Instagram or Twitter right when you wake up. Every time that you do it when you wake up, after even 30 minutes of doing that, you feel already tired. You start your day and you're already tired because your brain is about to crack. Your brain is about to just, it feels like it needs to cool down, even though you haven't done anything. In my example, right now it's 5:30, 5:40 a.m. and uh, it feels kind of peaceful to do these videos like this, because if I try to watch TikTok or watch YouTube shorts for 40 minutes before doing this video, I probably wouldn't do that. I probably would say, oh, I'm tired, my head hurts, and why do I need to even do these videos? I need to stay home and not do anything. So that's the problem. That's the problem of multitasking, because social media is multitasking, and switching from one news to another is multitasking, and uh, jumping from one task to another is multitasking. You think you're more efficient, but you're actually more efficient when you have time to deepen your understanding of the subject, to get more involved in this subject, because your brain can focus on it. It gets to the flow state. You suddenly have your productivity twice, thrice bigger as before. So remove multitasking and do what's called the deep work, the work that takes the long time. And when you have the rest properly, rest without something that doesn't overload your brain. That's how people used to do it back in the days, and I think that's how we need to do it right now if you want to feel happy, if you want to have more success, if you want to have more joy from our life and from doing the daily mundane tasks. Because if you always do all these three things in the wrong way that I mentioned, then your life probably feels too stressful, even though nothing is really happening in your life that is that stressful. You may have some problems at work or at studying or at home, but there are not really many serious problems. You may have two, three big problems that are very stressful, but you create much more problems when you do the previous three things. So remove them and or try to eliminate them as much as possible, and you will feel joy again. You would feel like you could be some young man back in the 50s or back in the 30s or 70s or whatever time you feel like the good old times. Try to implement this and say how it felt for you. I see you next time.